Hey folks, David Stewart here. It's time for some more philosophy, yes, Thinking Thursday, and today it's going to be the appeal to law, something I've been seeing a lot of over the last week because of a couple of arguments I happen to make on this channel. What is the appeal to law? Well, it's a type of argumentation that is normally a fallacy, but not always, and I will tell you the places and times where it's not a fallacy, in which you are evoking the law as the arbiter of what is right and what is wrong. Some written law, usually secular law, but not always. So you're saying something is right because it's legal, something is okay because it's legal, or something is bad because it is illegal, or wrong because it is illegal. Now let me start with the cases where it's not a fallacy. So it's not a fallacy if you're actually arguing in front of a judge. If you're trying to get a ruling on a judgment according to law, of course you're going to appeal to the law. If you are talking to a jury, you can imagine a lawyer would be appealing to the law. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I believe we have proven that the defendant has broken the law. That's an appeal to the law, and you say what the law is. There's also another case, which is when you are dealing with religion. So part of following a religion is following the laws of that religion. So you can go to a priest and say, hey, what am I supposed to do here? Or you go to the rabbi and say, what does the Mishnah say about this situation? And you go and you look at the law, and you're going to appeal to the law as the arbiter of what you ought to be doing. And that's part of your religious practice. Now, when it is a fallacy is when you are generally, this is how I've seen it the last week especially, you're responding to an ethical argument, you're responding to a logical argument with an appeal as final as it could be to the existence of current law. The problem with this, and the way that this can really just be easily shown to be a fallacy, is that laws change. Just because something is legal doesn't make it right. Even without laws changing, a man cheats on his wife. Is it a good thing that he cheats on his wife? Well, it is legal. Is it okay that he cheats on his wife? Well, his wife might think that it's not okay that he cheats on him, but it's legal. It's not against the law for him to cheat on her. At one point in time, it was legal to own slaves, which means according to the government and according to law, you could own another human being. So if you make an argument that says, hey, one man cannot own another man, right, or another woman. A man cannot own another human being. A human being is a subject and cannot be owned. Only property can be owned. Only objects can be owned. And people are not objects. Oh, well, legally, this guy owns slaves, so clearly people can be owned, right? It's like, well, no, I'm making a philosophical and ethical argument. So it's very clear from numerous historical examples, Jim Crow laws, to anything else you can think of today where something is wrong but happens to be legal, that ethics does not flow from law. Rather, law is an attempt to express ethics, often in an imperfect way. And law in this case might include, what's called common law, as well as law that happens to be specifically written by a legislature. So the changing nature of law should automatically disprove the idea that law is something that creates ethics. And you can only really believe that law creates ethics if you ascribe to total nihilism, in which case this is still a fallacy because you ought to be arguing for complete nihilism rather than arguing that the law says it's okay, therefore it's okay. That is a fallacy. If you actually believe in nihilism, you need to be arguing that there is no such thing as right and wrong. There is no yes or no to this ethical question, and that needs to be the argument rather than an appeal to law. There's also one more case where the appeal to law could actually not be a fallacy, and that is really not so much as an appeal to law as an appeal to realism or reality. When someone says, how could this happen? And it says, well, because they can, because the law says they can. How could the bank repossess my house? Because the law says that they can repossess your house. That's why. Why can the police officers confiscate my car? Because the law says they can. Why do they get to tow away my car? Because they can, because the law says they can. Right? In other words, their justification for the action is the reality of law, and you're unable to, you're physically unable to prevent the workings of the government when it's enabled by law. So the appeal to law is usually a response to something that is extra legal, and I usually make extra legal arguments on this channel. If I'm going to make an argument that is specifically legal, I'm probably not going to make my own argument. I'm probably going to give you the argument of an attorney who's actually worked out all of that stuff in the framework of our legal system, rather than try to give you some sort of legal opinion when I'm not an attorney. That wouldn't really be appropriate. And indeed, I never give out legal advice. When people ask me about copyright, I just tell you what I know about it as an artist and as a writer and somebody who exists in the creative space, having to deal with copyright issues and be aware of them. So anyway, that's the appeal to law. It is generally a fallacy. There's a couple of cases where it's not a fallacy. I'll tell you how I've seen it the last week is when I talked about rent seeking, I said, here's a philosophical argument for something, and somebody replies by, like, people had trouble conceiving of this idea that property is owned through improvements, and they're like, no, property is only owned by the law saying that you own it. Of course, it's only owned when the government says you own property. It's like, no, that's not the way it worked historically. The first culture I remember really trying to parcel out land were the Romans, and they only did it in limited quantities. But historically, you owned the places that you built things on, right? Most of the world is wilderness. Most of the world remains wilderness to some degree, but most of the world was wilderness. So you're making an ancient argument that, like, you don't own land that you haven't done anything to, which means that nomadic peoples didn't really own land that they happened to pass through. You have to live on it, you have to improve it, you have to do something to it for you to have philosophical ownership of it. So the response of an appeal to law, well, the law says that the person owns it. That's the point of, like, rent seeking, is that you go get the constable to say that you own a parcel of land and somebody else happens to be using it, and they're like, well, I own that land now, you have to pay me rent to farm your sheep on it. It's like, yeah, that nobody owned the land, right? That was the point of that. Likewise, on the last Star Wars video I made about, anything that George Lucas wasn't involved in isn't canon because it was his creation. People say, well, of course Disney decides what's canon now. They paid money for it. They legally own the IP. It's like, that's an appeal to law. That's not an appeal to reality. So, the reality is they can't unmake what George Lucas did. You cannot ascribe Star Wars 77 to different creative people than who created it. Not just George Lucas, but the entire crew. You can't unmake them. You can't unauthor them from history, which means ultimately you can't undo their creative decisions. Their creative decisions are kind of special. They're on an elevated plane that can't really be touched philosophically. Now, you can just say that it's that way, but that doesn't make it so, because you can't unmake the creative product. But you get this appeal to law. Disney owns the IP, therefore, well, no, that's not an argument. That is a fallacy in this particular case. So that's the appeal to law. It's a very interesting one, and it's one that a lot of people make in the current political climate when it comes to ethical arguments or extra legal arguments that are of a philosophical nature. When I ask what ought copyright laws to be like, someone responds with what they are, and they appeal to law. It's like, that's not a thing, right? We're asking what would they be best as, not what they are now. The whole nature of law changing upends this idea that ethics or even reality can flow from law. I know one of the states here, I think it was Arizona, declared through law that Pluto was a planet. Well, does that mean that Pluto is a planet? Well, to people who believe that the law determines reality, then it does. But to everybody else, they know that that's just some whimsical lawmaking from legislatures who, for whatever reason, were upset about Pluto being declared a planetoid and not a planet anymore by people who study such things. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. The new book is called Voices of the Void. You can get it for free by hopping on my mailing list at dvspress.com/list. And of course, you can also pre-order it. It'll be down below. And I'm always happy if you guys buy my books. But that's one you can get for free, and check it out. Sci-fi horror. I had a pretty interesting time writing it, and I hope you'll have a good time reading it. I'll see you guys next time.